very consciously cross-dressed as a girl when I was in high school to get people to quit, to try to fit. Very consciously. To try to fit in, I wore dresses.
You wore dresses. Okay. I thought you said that you had cross-dressed in high school.
I'm serious. I cross-dressed as a girl.
Yeah, right,
because
right,
I'm not a girl
right.
that way. So I was cross-dressing. I was in drag. As with dresses on, I look like I'm in drag. I don't look any different. I don't do anything any different. All these mannerisms, the way I am.
Yeah,
exactly how I was before, is exactly how I am now. You put a dress on me now, I always look like a boy in drag. Like,
yeah.
I was in drag. Always. Except for I have really good legs. When I wear heels, it looks good. Okay, fine. But, I don't make a very good... Well, anyway.
So once the desire cannot be located within the heteronormative narrative or structure, then the challenge becomes locating it in a queer structure or a queer narrative, or does the queer narrative or queer structures emerge once you can start to figure out this is the desire?
That's a good question. That makes me think right now, and this is probably the case, that of course we've just created a binary. There's
right.
Queer. So right now we're lumping everything that's not normative as queer, which I think is a good start. But it's going to smash wide eventually. Which is why I think that the trans stuff is becoming more richer and bubbling to the top.
Because it resists binaries?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's where the conversation needs to be.
Okay.
And not only because it resists binaries, but because transgender subject position requires, or at least sort of seems to demand, that we pay attention, that we address it through thinking about science and the humanities. Not one or the other. They have to be both there. You have to consider all of it. Because there's people who are literally taking giant amounts of testosterone to change their bodies, and that's science stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody like me who says, I'm not changing my physical body. But I experience it all through literature. Because my sexuality isn't carnal. It's based on this notion of writing. My sexuality is writer, not lesbian or whatever. That's what I mean. It's just we're so fixated on the sight of desire being only fucking.
So, queer studies or queer subjectivities will need to consider the importance of trans writing and trans genre and trans subjectivities if it doesn't want to fall within...
What's interesting is that's the battle, right? What the battle is to me in my head is that queer, in its opposition to normative, which is how it is kind of set up.
Yeah.
It's limiting from the get-go. And all that's happened is usually trans is subsumed within queer. Like, queer is a big container and trans is a piece of that container.
Right.
But what if you don't even have that at all, and you just go to trans conversation, trans literature, trans experience of all these different kinds, and you look to that?
Yeah.
And what I say, as soon as you're doing that, as soon as I'm thinking about trans things, I've got to go back and recoup the brilliance in African American women's feminist literature or whatever. For it being sort of trans, meaning moving between, not resting in an either or. Right, so okay, so here's right, so wanderer, so there's a classic wanderer stereotype, but again, that classic wanderer stereotype is a white male. It's a hobo, it's a...
Yeah.
But that's not what you mean.
No.
So really, what you're talking about, though, is embracing liminal space. Not being here or there. That's a trans position.
Right.
Not being clearly A or B. And that student is kind of that in a lot of ways, right? A grad student for sure. You're not an undergrad and you're not a faculty member.
Yeah. Huh. And you say that that's trans
That's what I'm starting to think about. Is like, okay, so Harriet Tubman. We're back to Harriet Tubman.
Mm-hmm.
So my attraction to her story, okay, so you could say, well, gosh, she was this figure that people called a man, and that's what you were attracted to. And I'm like, no, what I probably was more like attracted to was her continual desire to remain in or seek liminal space.
Hmm.
So there's a story of her going on the Underground Railroad. Oh, the story is, the legend is like 19 times. And then all these historians get together and they're like, what? No, not all these. There's a historian who says, let's really see. Let's look at all the documentation. Was it 19? No, probably not. It was, either 9 or 10 or 11 or some numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, historians care.
Mm-hmm.
What's more interesting is that she continually put herself into that space. And somebody would say, well, God, she's a hero. Look at that heroic move she did. I'm like, okay, it's heroic. I'm not discounting that. But, or it's brave. It's brave. It's so brave. She's such a hero. What if she just needed to be in that liminal space over and over? What if she didn't want to be all the way... What if she liked it there? What if she was, like, sexually driven to the trans space because she felt good in it? She felt good in that scary place.
Yeah.
Of not being in free land and not being in slave territory. What's my evidence? After that part was over, she went into the war, and what was she? She was a nurse. Okay, she took care of people, but what was she quickly? A spy and a scout. You know what that means? So as a spy, you're in a liminal space, right? And as a scout, you're physically in that land area that is no man's land between this side and that side. That's what a scout does. She's continually putting herself in that space over and over in her life. Then what'd she do? She opened a home for old people who had no life left and were poor. What the fuck are they? They're between life and death, literally, sitting in this old folks' home. She sought that space over and over.
Huh.
And I think I live in that space. I think I've always lived in that space. Unless I'm not living in that space. It's most stressful for me when I'm living in it. It's hard to live in liminal space. It's a hard subject position.